Phew, huh? Oh, thank you. You don't have to clap yet. Wait till the end for me. No, that was wonderful. That was great. Thanks, Sean, and the whole group. Something about those kind of moments that just stir us and remind us of why we're here. And let's be honest, for a lot of us, it's simply to get a charge to make it through another week. For some of us, it's the chance to celebrate the end of a week and for good things. And for some of us, it's just a chance to get a spark of hope again in our life. So whatever brought you here today, we are glad you're here. This is the first time with us. Welcome. I have good news and bad news for you. Good news is we're glad you're here. Bad news is you came at a terrible time. Because today is the end of a message series, a 4-part message series on adulting, the keys to being grown up. And so you're getting just the last part of this. You can go online and catch the rest of it. But let me give you a little quick background of where we've been. This has been our operating definition. Adulting, making a bunch of small decisions every day that before you didn't even know people make. And that's kind of what adulting is. And we've looked at different topics every week, and today it's this idea. You grow up with this sense of fairness, and if you're a mother or father, if you're a good mother or father, you teach your kids that life is not fair, right? But let's be honest, we still think it ought to be fair. And so then you hit those ages of becoming an adult, and you think you ought to be fair, and you grew up as a special snowflake where you were, everything was wonderful and everybody thought you were great, and everything you put your hands to, brought smiley faces and stars and were put up around your house. Then you go to your job, your first job, and they don't give you stars anymore. And they don't get you certificates of participation. In fact, they don't really care about you at all, except for what you produce. And you begin to think, how is that fair? How is that fair in this whole thing of fairness? And then you hit those moments. It's a regular Friday afternoon, and then it happens. Or maybe it's a Wednesday morning, and things are going along so good, and then and maybe something small like, your battery's dead. And if you ever notice your battery always goes dead when you're running late? Or you spill coffee on your outfit on your way to an interview, and it's like, oh, I got to go back, or do I go in like this? What do I do now? Or maybe it's something even harder. Maybe it's hearing a terrible diagnosis, whether for yourself or somebody you love. Maybe it's that idea that I have this thing now and it's going to be a thing for the rest of my life. In fact, it may end up taking my life. Or you get the news that somebody only has so long to live. And one of the hard things about being an adult is weathering those storms and continuing to move on. Because from my perspective, one of the things about becoming an adult is this reality that we rub up against these things and they begin to shape us, they begin to change us. And sometimes that change is uncomfortable. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes we're not always with the things that have been knocked off through these really tough things. But one of the things about adulting is you learn about AGO, which spells AGO is what it spells. That's what it spells. Here's what it means. It's another growth opportunity, right? It's one of those moments when you go through and you think, maybe my mom or my dad told me about these, but now it's just another growth opportunity, and I got to push through this and figure this out. But as you make it through those growth opportunities, you discover some things. You gain some more adulting lessons. In In fact, maybe you get into your 30s and you gather around your friends who maybe you went to college with, or maybe you started your job with, people that you've hung out with for a while that know your story and you know their stories, and you've gone through some stuff, and you sit around and you have one of those times were tough conversations. Have you ever had one of those times of tough conversation with friends? You know, you sit around and you're telling the stories, and everybody listens to your story, and you talk about how hard it was and how you were scraping things together to start your business or to get through school, or when somebody got diagnosed with cancer and you've made it through, and you sit there and you make those words and you say, you know, times were tough, and everybody around the group in the same solemn tone nods their head and says those same words. Times were tough. And what do you do? What do you do when you're faced with that as the prospect of what it means to be an adult? And here's two things I want you to write down. They're on your outline if you want to fill them in. Number one, everyone goes through a hard time now and then. Everybody say that with me. Everyone goes through a now and then, right? That's an important life lesson. Everybody does. Even though you've watched their Facebook for years now, and it seems like nothing ever bad happens to them. They're always at like Disneyland or in the Bahamas, some mountain someplace, eating amazing food, meeting amazing people, and you think to yourself, that's the first life lesson. Everyone goes through a hard time now and then. Secondly, probably when you're young, I remember hearing older people say this. You know, that the older they got, the more they didn't know, and I kept thinking to myself, how's that possible? I thought as you got older, you learned more stuff and you figured more stuff out. The reality is nobody has it all figured out. In fact, we're going to see a passage that Pastor Dave talked about last week that'll remind us of that before we take the step into a story from the life of Jesus. But before we go there, I invite you to bow your heads and let's pray together. Lord, we are thankful this morning to recognize your presence in this place. And as we sung together and we put those words off the screen into our minds, into our lips, we're reminded again of just how above and beyond all this stuff you are. But how at the same time you're here for us, you're with us. And today as we talk about this last part of adulting and fairness and trying to figure life out and lessons from it, for some of us in this room, it has been a daunting task. Whether in our 30s or our 40s or our 50s or our 60s even, we still feel like we haven't got this figured out. And for those of us that are in our teens and 20s and we've dreamed about becoming an adult and the freedom and the finances and the faith and all of the stuff that we have a chance to experience and make our own, looks so hopeful. But today I just pray again that your presence would make a difference for us. That in those moments when we desperately need you, you would show up. And in those moments that we don't think we need you, I pray somehow you would remind us that you're there in these ways. And so today as we look at these, some wisdom, some counsel from thousands of years ago, I just ask again that you can make it relevant to our lives, make it connect with our lives today. And we just pray a little bit would rub off, and it would help us as we try to figure out how to live as men and women who believe in you, in your name. Amen. Passage that Pastor Dave looked at last week, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, 11. And I love how it starts because it reminds us how life sort of works. He says, listen, when I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. When I was a kid, I did kid things. You know, I believed it when my parents said, you know, prayer, God answers all prayers. And so when I couldn't find my cat and my dad thought it had run away and was sure it got run over someplace, and I said, let's pray about it. They prayed about it, right? But you get a little older and the prayers don't always seem to get answered and you wonder. But Paul's saying, listen, when I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. And the impression you can get from reading that passage is that he grew and he had it all finally figured out. But he reminds us what we talked about as a life principle before, that no one ever has it all figured out, because this is what he says next. Now, as an adult, we see things imperfectly, that is obscurely, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then, talking about the future and when Jesus returns in heaven and the new earth and all that stuff, but then we will see everything with perfect clarity. It's clear because we get to see things face to face, not obscured by life and distance and just the stuff of life. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. Now, if you're somebody who still lives at home with your parents, I suggest you not bring this up when you disagree with them. Don't remind them that what they know now is partial and incomplete, but just know, this is Paul, the guy who wrote the majority of the part of the Bible we call the New Testament. As he gives his testimony, he says, listen, I grew out of stuff, but also as I grew out of stuff, I recognized that I don't have it all figured out, and that's not really the goal, to have it all figured out. All that I know now is incomplete, but then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. Now, God knows me completely, but I don't know him completely because I can't, because of all this stuff. And it's an important lesson for us as we think about adulting, about growing up, about making these decisions that we didn't think we had to make before. And to somehow be comfortable that you don't know everything, that you can't know everything. And no, that's not the reason the internet was invented, so you knew everything. That's still not possible, all right? Because the reality is there is one thing that has the potential to destroy your life. It has the potential to devastate your career. It is the main reason marriages break up, relationships break up. Now, if you've been around, gone to some marriage counseling or listened to marriage weekends, you've probably heard that there are 3 things that break up marriages, right? Number 1, oh, the guy said sex, I heard that. Number 2, money, they're very good. Number 3, communication, right? Those are the 3 things you've heard. I want to tell you today, those are not the reason. Those are just simply the symptoms of the one thing that destroys marriages, that destroys relationships, that destroys careers. You know what that one thing is? By the way, a little commercial. We have a great marriage weekend planned in April called Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage. Guys, trust me on this. I'm going to be honest with you. The idea of spending a weekend at a marriage retreat is not our idea of a fun weekend, right? But this one, trust me, this one will be different than anyone you've ever been through. Because you will laugh. And who doesn't like to laugh? You'll laugh at yourself, you'll laugh at your spouse, you'll laugh together. You might even cry a little bit. Not cry in the, oh, I have to look in her eyes. And hold her hands and say words to her that I said so many years ago. I have to write a letter. And none of that stuff happens, all right? So trust me in this, none of the mushy-gushy stuff that the majority of our guys go, I don't want any kind of weekend. This is a good weekend. That's our push for that. But let's get back to this, all right? Unmet expectations. And it goes like this. Here's a little formula. Expectation minus observation equals frustration. That when we have this disconnect, let's imagine. Guys, I'll talk to you today. You come home from a day at work, and you expect to be met at the door by your smiling wife, right? She has your slippers for you. Has you a smoking jacket even though you've never smoked. The cat's been sitting in your chair just warming it, but she sees you, she gets out of the way so you can go sit in a nice warm chair. The paper's there, but it's also been taken apart so that the sports is at the top. You can smell the aroma of your favorite meal being cooked again. The kids are quietly doing their homework. But when they hear your voice and hear your footsteps come in, they run downstairs to line up and say, "Welcome, Daddy. We love you. Welcome, Daddy. We love you. But we have to get back to our homework now." Expectations. And oftentimes these expectations, sometimes they're verbalized, but more often they're just expected. Right? And not to be too harsh on you ladies, but I'm going to give you a little clue into the man's psyche. He is not a mind reader. I hope that doesn't get you in trouble, all right? Let me get in trouble today. Don't you get in trouble, all right? But I'm trying to tell you this, Don't say he should have known, because I will tell you, we are dumb as a doorknob. We don't know unless you tell us. And if you don't tell us, we don't know. Yeah, all right. But here's your observation. You come home. The door, you open, and you hear this crazy sound blaring out of there. You hear kids screaming. You hear music blaring. You hear the fire, the smoke alarm going off. As your wife runs past you on the way to the kitchen holding one of your kids. You don't know which one because you had so many of them, right? And it looks like it's going to be one of those nights. Takeout, because whatever she was cooking, it got too cooked. Because she's been working and she's been taking care of the kids, and the kids have been home and they're fighting, and one of them has to go to soccer practice, the other has to go to music practice. They're both in different directions, and they're both at the exact same time. Your wife has some kind of meeting she's got to get to. What do you do when your observation about how life works meets those expectations? Frustration, right? In fact, in life, we often have expectations that go unmet, and we're often frustrated because of it, right? I mean, it's just the reality. We have these unmet expectations, and it just gets us frustrated more and more and more because it isn't going the way that I thought it would or we planned it should. But the good news is to let your observation take precedence over your expectation. That's a hard thing to do. But it is the adult thing to do, which makes us all wish we could go back to being a kid, right? But somehow to take those unmet expectations and recognize that some of them aren't fair expectations. And some of them may be, but at this moment is not probably the time to talk about it. This moment is just to get through this whole thing. In fact, I love the insight from the famed theologian Antonio Banderas when he said, expectations is the mother of all frustration, right? It's there. And the crazy thing, this is not a modern thing. This isn't because we live in a time when so much stuff is so easy and so quick and we want it right now. This has been around for thousands of years. In fact, we're going to look at a story right now, found over in John chapter 6. Background is Jesus has a bunch of disciples. He's not just the 12 weren't his disciples. There was a whole mess more disciples who'd been following him from place to place. And Jesus just had one of those, what we like to call, come to Jesus discussions with them. When he kind of says some stuff that's really harsh and direct. And he's just got done saying to this big mass of people, unless you're willing to eat my body and drink my blood, you have no part of me. To which a lot of the disciples go, excuse me? Because that just sounds a little out there, right? This is where we pick it up. When the followers of Jesus heard this idea of blood and body, many of them said, this teaching is hard. Not just hard, it's offensive. Who can accept? Who can hear it? I mean, it's a dramatic statement, and we our benefit is we're thousands of years beyond this, and in a Christian tradition, we've understood that what he's talking about here is not literally eating his body and drinking his blood, but it's this idea of the communion that we talk about, this idea of the bread symbolizing his body, and this idea of inviting him in. We have our theological ways of getting there, but in the moment, they struggle with this. Because I don't want you chewing on my body, drinking my blood. That's. So they say, who can accept this? And John tells us a little insight in Jesus. He says that knowing that his followers, that his disciples, were complaining, that is grumbling about this, Jesus said the most compassionate thing he could say at the moment. Does this bother you guys? Which you would have thought, hey, let me explain it in a little more detail, right? But no, Jesus says he knows that they're complaining about this, and he just sort of prods them. He says, does this bother you guys? Because if it does, I need to ask you something else. Will it also bother you to see the Son of Man going back, that is ascending to the place where he came from, that is going back to heaven, to actually see me go, is that going to bother you too? To which they respond like some of us would respond of, that's again a little out there. After Jesus said this, many of his followers, that his disciples, left him and stopped following him. See, there are moments in your life and in my life when we run up hard against, whether it's a teaching of Jesus or some reality in life, and we look at ourselves and we go, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can follow through with that. And what am I going to do in those moments? Am I going to stick with this, or am I going to step away and just say, it doesn't make sense, or it isn't working? What do you do in those moments? And then Jesus looks at the 12 followers. Because we know at least there's 12 left over. I don't know how many more. There's probably more. But at least he looks at the 12 closest guys, and he simply says to them, do you want to leave me too? And when Jesus asked this question, what he's looking for in their response is this: G-R-I-T, which spells G-R-I-T. Stick with me. I already taught you this before, right? But what he's looking for is G-R-I-T, which simply means, are they generating relentless inner toughness? Because part of being an adult is generating relentless inner toughness. Yeah. I mean, isn't that true? It's pushing ahead, it's sticking with it, it's making that commitment and following it through even though it seems like it's not going to work out. And when Jesus says, guys, are you going to leave me too? Because everybody else, this has been too hard of a teaching. This is too mindful. They just don't get it. And are you guys going to leave too? And he asked that in order for them to develop the G-R-I-T. Simon Peter, the vocal one, if you've read much of your Bible, you know he's always the one that responds to Jesus. He simply says, where would we go? I mean, they have given now 3 years, 2 years to following, to leaving everything they had before and following Jesus. Going wherever he went, doing whatever he did. Where else would we go? You have the words that give eternal life. And we believe and know that you are the Holy One from God. And I believe when Peter makes this statement, he is not making this bold statement. Because if we didn't have the first part, I think you could make that. But when he says, where else would we go? He's not saying, where else would we go? He's saying, Jesus, we don't understand all this stuff. But the parts we do understand is that what you say has more than just about this life. It's about life forever. And what you say has brought us to believe and know that you are the Holy One from God, even though at times we're not sure what that means. So, let me talk to you as we wind up today about adulting, G-R-I-T. Remember what G-R-I-T is? Generating. All right. So if you're at the age of adulting, here's what you need to know. That adulting grit, G-R-I-T, is a byproduct of following Jesus. I think it makes more sense with Jesus in your life. Not only is it a byproduct of following Jesus, it is hard but worth it. And you need to know that. It is hard. Because things don't always make sense. Things aren't always explained. Because if you have enough time underneath your belt and underneath your life, you have asked it sometimes, why in the world, God, did this happen? How many of you ever asked that question? Right? Why did this happen? It doesn't make sense. I've either done everything right and it turned out not like that, or I must have missed out. Why? But just like Peter responded, it is hard, but it's worth it. So let me give you some adulting G-R-I-T tips. Number one, if you're adulting, recognize the difference between 6-month problems and 6-minute or 6-day problems. Because there's a big difference. But it's so easy to believe that the problem right at the moment is so big, so spectacular, so amazing, it's gonna ruin my life, when really, just go get yourself another cup of coffee if that's what you need. Go change your shirt and just do it. It's not going to ruin everything, but it's important to figure out what's the difference between these two things. Secondly, most things that feel like an emergency, a disaster at age 21 aren't. I think back when I was 21, the things that were big and important to me. And now being a few years beyond 21, I think so much of what I was so important there, so wound up, so much a big thing, in the bigger scheme of things wasn't that big of a deal. And that's not to discount in the moment, it feels like a big deal. But sometimes to remind yourself of perspective, that in 6 months or 6 years, this will be just a memory. It'll be one of those moments that you can sit around with your friends and have that times were tough, time-honored sharing of stories. In fact, let's look at a little graph I did for you. Things that aren't disasters, technically speaking, all right? Number one, in the moment, they seem like a disaster, right? You got a flat tire, you don't have a spare because nobody has a spare anymore. The battery's dead. At the moment, it seems like, in the big scheme of things, it's not really a disaster. Secondly, anything having to do with clothing. Right? I just don't have anything that works today. I'm not going to wear this old thing, Obviously, unless it's on fire, then it is a big disaster. But in general, clothing stuff, not a disaster, even though at the moment it feels like it. Because you spilt something on it, and you got that big interview or that big report or that big presentation. Another thing that isn't a disaster, even though in the moment it may seem like it, and this could be animal vomit, your vomit. I'll give you an example of this from my life. Last time I went to a amusement park of roller coasters. Last time, because I'm never going back again, and here's the reason I'm not going back again. My youngest son had graduated, I think it was from high school at that moment. So we had to say, hey, let's go celebrate this. He and I drove a couple hours away, went to this amusement park. We got there early in the morning. We got some breakfast, pancakes. That's a good hearty breakfast for riding roller coasters. That seemed like in the moment. Then we started riding them. We were the first one, the second one, and I'm not a big roller coaster fan. The older I got, the less I like that experience. But we were having a good time, and we got it, and finally, we were working our way up. I said, let's start small. We'll work our way up to the tough one. We got on the tough one. It was that one that goes up and backwards, and it spins you all over, and you come down. And I was doing great until the final turn. And it used to be in the old days, the roller coaster came right at the end and you just got out. Well, then now, they come up, they, and you're locked in, right? You got this death grip on you. You're locked in, and it's like 100 yards away from the end, right? And then it finally slowly creeps up. And we made the corner, and I was like, oh, man, I don't feel good. Man, that's a long ways to the end. I just need to get out. And then at that moment, I felt something. I felt it kind of here first, and then I felt it here, and then I felt it right here. I looked at him. That's about all I could do because I was locked, and I looked at him. I couldn't move forward, and I started to say something. Yeah, you probably remember how it sounds. It's kind of a blah sound, and it just literally went everywhere on me. So now I'm still 100 yards from the end, and finally, it starts to roll, and I had a couple of experiences while I was sitting there. And then I'm looking, thinking, here I am. My son's probably 18 at that time. I'm thinking, how embarrassed is he going to be? I mean, here I am, his old, his dad. I've thrown up all over myself, We're just hanging out at the park, and now he's there, and we get there, and of course everybody around, there are a couple of girls that were either in front or behind us, and they're like, ew, Which, by the way, girls, is a great way to bring warmth and comfort to somebody who's experienced something like that. So I got it all over. I got it all over me. So I get off, and everybody looks at you like you're a zombie. And so we kind of walk, and I'm looking, and he's like, oh, and I said, let's find a bathroom. So I find a bathroom, and I'm washing stuff out, which, by the way, gets some of the stuff off, but doesn't get it all off, and the smell just doesn't seem to go away, I needed to be one of those commercials for Tide or something at that moment, but there was none of that. So I got it off, and I'm there, and I'm just like, oh, man. And then my son said something to me that sticks with me to this day. He said, hey, Dad, let's just go. We've written a bunch of stuff, let's just go. Which I thought was great, because in that moment, I was thinking about how embarrassed he was going to be with me walking around with him and kind of smelling and just and coming out of there. And now your clothes are all wet, and it wasn't one of those parks that had any water rides, so people are like, hey, what's this guy doing? So we got in the car, we drove to the nearest Ross, because I love Ross. I get something for like $5. I got a shirt and some shorts, and that was my outfit for the day. My point simply is this, that it seemed like a disaster at the moment, but in the big scope of things, it actually turned out to be something pretty cool, because of how my son handled it and how he gave back to me. Something else that aren't disasters, being broke in a temporary way. I said temporary way, right? If it's a long-term thing, it could be a disaster, but temporary. I'm guessing, for those of you that are on the younger side of things, I'm going to ask the older folks in the crowd today, how many of you have ever been overdrawn, got kind of a late, one of those things? Raise your hand nice and proud. Be proud of this, right? You're an American, you're a capitalist. Look at that. See, I want you to know it's not a disaster. It's going to ruin things. Another thing that aren't disasters, anything involving your fingernails or hair, again, unless it's on fire, right? Because they will grow back. And I had to put the usually part because I had to be honest today, right? But in general, a bad haircut is only going to look bad for a little while, right? You get your fingernails done the color you don't like, it's only going to be a little while. But it's just a reminder again not to let these things that seem so big in the moment get you off course. Something else. This one we'll let linger for a moment, all right? One of the best things you can do when something bad happens is to ask yourself the important question, not just what can I learn from this, but what's my part of this? We live in a time when it's so easy to try to figure out right away how I'm not going to let it stick to me. But I will tell you that if you own up to something, especially at your job, your boss will be proud that you owned up to it and said, hey, it's on me. I didn't come through with that. Now, they may not be happy, but they'd much rather have that than somebody says, oh, no, it wasn't me. I just filled out some stuff. It was really them. Learning to take responsibility and own it is a huge, huge part of adulting. And lastly, you look at these disciples, and a bunch of them left because it was just too much. And I believe the ones that stayed didn't have it all figured out. Again, I don't think when Peter makes that statement, you are the Holy One of God, he's making a harsh statement, a hard standing statement. I think he's just explaining, what else would I do? Where else would I go to get this sense of dealing with my failures, my faults, my brokenness, my sins, those times when I'm just mean for no good reason? Where else would I get that at? And to know I've seen enough to believe at least this far, and maybe I don't understand the rest. But if you're here today, I want you to know that's true. And it's new not just because I say it's true because that's really the experience. You go back 2,000 years to Jesus' followers, and his followers did not believe a lot of the things that we, especially as Seventh-day Adventists, believe. This may shock you. One of the beliefs of our church is the idea of healthful living. You got to do what you can to live healthfully. For some people, that means becoming a vegetarian. That's not a requirement to be part of an Adventism. In fact, Jesus was not a vegetarian, which causes some people a little concern. I'm not sure why. I kind of like Jesus' approach to stuff. So they didn't believe that stuff. They didn't always, when they said, we believe you're the Holy One of God, that didn't mean they had this clear, full understanding of everything. They still were working the stuff out. I mean, decades later, Peter, who's all for the idea of not just having Jews as part of followers of Jesus, but Gentiles too, will have a moment when he kind of gets a little racist. Kind of steps away from the Gentiles because there's a bunch of important Jews in town, and when important Jews are in town, you go hang with the Jews. And Paul had to call him on it. My point is simply this. Don't let the things that you don't know or the things that you struggle with understanding become a barrier to the things that you do know and that you do understand. And what you need to know, if you're kind of in this early category of adulting and you came out of that whole thing that, again, special snowflake, and you can never do any wrong, you need to understand something. You get outside of your bubble, you are not a special snowflake. You are just literally one in billions of people. But not to let that blow you off, and I want you to appreciate those that still look at you as something special. Your mom, your dad, your friends, and God. Because while God may not see you as a special snowflake, he sees you as something very special to him. Enough that he would die for you. So that said, I invite you to bow your heads and let's just wrap this up quick. Lord, I personally am thankful again for Jesus. I'm thankful for the hard things that he said that I do not understand. And I'm thankful for the things that he said that I do understand. And I'm thankful again to know that you love all of us enough, that you already took the first step, that you have died for us, that you came back to life for us, that you gave us a way to deal with this sin and failure and false issue that's in all of our lives. And to begin to have that, as Lydia prayed to you earlier, Father, this masterpiece begin to work in our lives so that we can be who you created us to be and who ultimately we will be happiest being. And today I just pray for those that are wondering about that right now. I pray that you would continue to convince them of that truth in your name.